Hello. Hi there. And welcome. Is it welcome back? Welcome back. Sure. To a much belated edition of Harry Potter Abridged. That's right. We are once again traversing the story. We'll keep it simple. Yeah, the story of our beloved hero, Mr. Potter. Um, Today, even though I'm late in doing this, today is the anniversary of our lovely Schwifty squad, and I would be remiss not to mention so. I had intended to record and release this episode earlier in the day, and it may be that by the time it is released now, that many of you will already be well into the 18th of June instead of the 17th, which was our actual anniversary. Forgive me, it just didn't work out the way I planned, but such is life. All the same, here we are, back yet again. Um, just to, because it's been so long, I feel the need to catch us up, even though, if you were listening in order for some reason in the future, you wouldn't need it. But much as the way a novel will give us a little a refresher, even though if you were reading them in order, you wouldn't need it. Here we are. This is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Chamber of Secrets. Did I say that? I don't know. And we are entering chapter number 6. By the way, this is episode number 23. But we are entering chapter number 6, which is entitled Gilderoy Lockhart. In our previous chapter, you may remember that that Harry and Ron did the not so terribly advisable thing of taking the Weasleys' enchanted car, flying car that is, and flying it to Hogwarts upon finding that they were unable to get through the barrier at King's Cross Station. So anyway, and all's well that ends well, as they say, and they, of course, because of the nature of these stories, they survived the ordeal, even though it was a close one. Ron's wand got snapped. They've received some punishment, but they're not expelled. They're still at school. And they got back to their common room and were cheered heartily by their classmates. And so the evening, after a good bit of scaring, their evening ended with Harry grinning to himself, despite the fact that he knew he shouldn't. And so, of course, the next chapter begins with us finding out that Harry barely grinned once the next day. However, so things don't stay up for Harry, because as it is with main characters, if you're a good author, you have to put them through it, as it were, and so it is. So we get a little description of the Great Hall again, because that's where they're having breakfast the next morning. And the food, we have a food description with the porridge and the kippers and the toast and the eggs and the bacon. And of course the enchanted ceiling, which is the ceiling that shows the weather outside, is a cloudy gray, which of course is a nice literary omen. And so Harry and Ron come to breakfast, and Hermione's there, and Hermione is reading one of Lockhart's books, Voyages with Vampires. By the way, the Lockhart book titles are ridiculous and hilarious all at the same time. Anyway, and there's a nice study in alliteration in those titles. Anyway, And we find out that Hermione's still kind of like disapproving of the not so wise choice that Harry and Ron made the day before, and so she's a little stiff and cold in her greeting. Morning. So yeah, and then of course Neville, on the other hand, is greeting them cheerfully, and Neville is Neville. Well, I should say that Neville seems, for I don't know exactly where you really don't get the change in Neville till very late, if I'm not mistaken. Like, Neville seems kind of like the same character for most of the books, and it's not till way later that we sort of get his transformation into a bit of a leader and a rebel. But from, and I wonder if that was always planned. Actually, I mean, maybe it was. It's hard to say with her, because sometimes things that you think she was planning on doing, she wasn't, and vice versa. So, anyway, and we got to mention that the post is due soon, because Neville is expecting some things from his gran. And then, sure enough, here come the owls, blah, 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 blah. And we have the arrival of Ron's family owl, Errol. And aside from the fact that Errol is still just like, a perfect representation of the Weasleys' financial status, being that he's old and bedraggled. Hey, look, there's the word bedraggled. I actually was saying it before I read it again. Anyway, so we have that, but then Ron realizes that, not only did Errol bring a message, but he brought a howler. And we realize that nobody knows. We realize that Harry and Hermione have no idea what this means. But Ron and Neville, who are who grew up in the wizarding world, know exactly what it means. And Neville provides us with a little bit of it's not exactly exposition, it's just more of like build up to the moment, where he says, go ahead and open it, it'll be worse if you don't. And he's okay. So, and this is something that he said, Neville says, my gran sent me one once, and I ignored it, and it was horrible. Maybe it was the previous year, but if it had been, it would be. You don't get sent a howler without it causing a stir at Hogwarts, because everybody's in the Great Hall together when the post arrives. So. And Neville lived with his gran. So when would she have had occasion to send Neville a howler? Not and I specifically I'm saying when, because obviously the what could have been anything, because Neville's always like forgetting something or whatever. So like anything could have caused her to want to send him one in theory, but where would he have been to have received such? Unless, again, like I said, unless it were at school. And, I mean, I know that people do occasionally receive messages outside of regular post time, but it seems like most people receive them in the morning when the post comes in. In fact, it seems almost, well, I mean, I don't know. I guess, again, our story revolves with the camera mostly over Harry's shoulder, so we don't always see what everybody else deals with. But, yeah, it's just one of those things where, like, I feel like this was mostly just to explain and to provide a little bit of anticipation for the moment, more than there's any practicality there. Because, again, when would Neville have gotten a howler that it wouldn't have shown up in this story? Because even though the story revolves around Harry is mostly in the same places that Neville is, as far as when it comes to like breakfast in the Great Hall and when the owls come for the post. So anyway, in my pre-read or pre-listen, as it were, in this case, I noted that and was like, when, how? I'm sure there's some circumstance. Maybe Neville was like staying over at a friend's house or something, and I don't know what could have caused. I don't know. I mean, who were Neville's? You kind of get the sense that Neville didn't really grow up with a ton of friends. Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, yeah, Neville, provides us with a nice, build up to the moment with saying how horrible it is, and Harry's like, well, it's a Howler, and Ron's not saying anything. He's just staring at the letter, which is then beginning to smoke at the corners. And Neville's like, open it. It'll be over in a few minutes. And so Ron grabs the envelope from Errol's beak and opens it, and Neville automatically stuffs his fingers in his ears because, again, Neville knows what's going to happen, and he's our insight into all of this because, it's Ron's job to be, like, stunned and scared. And then all of a sudden, there's sort of like an explosion of sound, and Mrs. Weasley's voice is yelling through the Great Hall, which, by the way, I mean, I understand like this whole thing is to bring home the seriousness of what happened because the message that she sends is a pretty serious one, but like, does she really want everybody at Hogwarts to know? I mean, I guess it's going to be in the Daily Prophet probably, but in fact, I'm pretty sure that it is. But the discretion, you'd think. I mean, I guess again, and this is supposed to sort of exemplify the temperament of Mrs. Weasley that she was so angry that she decided to send a Howler because she could not control her emotions or something. I don't know. Anyway. So she's on about stealing the car and how she's surprised that they didn't get expelled, and and then she's mentioning what his father has gone through and what both of them went through when they realized that the car was gone and all of that. So, I mean, obviously, and don't get me wrong, Mrs. Weasley has every reason to be upset with Ron after this ridiculous incident, as it were. But still, anyway, we get a description of the fact that everything is like 100 times louder than usual, so it's like being yelled through a megaphone, basically, is the volume level that we're sort of working with here. 100 times louder than usual, which is probably not on the nose, but hey, a lot louder than usual is enough. And again, we get the mention that everybody's swiveling around to see who received the Howler, and that's sort of my point about like if Neville had ever gotten one, it would have been something that couldn't have been avoided being noticed. Anyway, whatever. And so, a letter from Dumbledore was received by the Weasley's parents, which of course it was, because you write home to the parents whenever somebody gets in major trouble. Not that they would have needed to hear from Dumbledore to find out what happened, but they could have died. She's freaking out about that, which of course is legitimate. And Harry's like, of course, I wondered when my name was going to come up. So he's just trying to kind of like pretend like he can't hear what he can't not hear. And And then there's the part about Mr. Weasley's facing an inquiry at work. And that's something, too, where I'm like, do you really want to, like, shout that to the whole school? I guess, again, I think that the whole idea is that her emotions are so over the top right now that she doesn't really care. Anyway. And so, yeah, and of course we get the infamous, and if you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight back home. And that's the end of the Howler. And we get a little bit of the Ron and Hermione quibbling, where, you know, Hermione's like, I don't know what you expected, Ron, and Ron's like, don't tell me I deserved it. Which he did, but again, the Howler is it's pretty intense. Not only are you getting yelled at like a megaphone volume, but it's in front of everybody. But you know, worth noting that you shouldn't go taking your parents' car to fly to school. Not a good idea. So anyway, and Harry's just like, you know, he's lost his appetite. He feels horrible. Because I mean, he was an accomplice to this whole thing, even though it was totally Ron's idea. He went along with it, and he enjoyed it as much as Ron did. So, yeah. Anyway, and he feels bad too because, you know, the Weasleys were so good to him over the summer and letting him stay there, and like after after the car was used the first time by Fred and George to break Harry out of the Dursleys' house. So anyway, and after all that, then McGonagall's coming along with the Gryffindor's timetables, which is incidentally another one of those cases where British words versus American USEN. I really wish we had a better word. This is why we end up calling ourselves Americans. It's not just arrogant. It's that there's not a good word. Anyway, that would be your in the U.S. that would be your schedule, but they call it a timetable. Just one of those little word differences there. Anyway, so they're looking over their timetables, and they have herbology first, and so they head off for that, and we find out that one thing that was good about the Howler is that Hermione seems to now think that they've been punished thoroughly, and so she's being nice again. She doesn't feel the need to be disapproving any longer because Mrs. Weasley has virtually yelled at them. And even though she wasn't technically yelling at Harry, I mean, his name got brought into it and all that, so yeah. Anyway, so they get over to the greenhouses, and right as they come up to the crowd standing outside, oh, and then Professor Sprout comes into view, coming across the lawn with Lockhart, because we have to get some. There's a lot of ridiculous Lockhart scenes in this book, but I mean, you know, they're designed to give us a full picture of how ridiculous he is. And by the way, like, it's an interesting thing because, you know, I'm sure most people probably know that are fans of the series that Rowling based Lockhart on somebody that she's met in real life, and that she suspects to this day that this person has no idea that happened, that she wrote this character based on this person, but she thinks that this person is ridiculous and arrogant and self-absorbed and all of the things that Lockhart is. I would love to find out who it is. It's very possible that it's not somebody famous, but if it is, it would be even better. Just to know. And so, anyway, So Sprout and Lockhart show up, and we get a little description of what Sprout looked like because again, it's a near the beginning of the novel, and so we have to be our memories have to be refreshed. But I'm not going to give you that because you know. And of course, there's also part of the reason why I guess we're given the description of Sprout is because she has a she's a worker. She's the kind of person not just a worker. That's not the right word, but like she works in the dirt. She's a little bit grubby. Her robes are patched and faded, whereas we get the contrast of Lockhart, who is immaculate in sweeping robes of turquoise. And his hair is shining under a perfectly positioned turquoise hat with gold trimming, and so that's part of it. There, we had to have the contrast for Lockhart. Just describing Lockhart would be good, but describing him in contrast with the way that Sprout looks only heightens his immaculatity. You know what I'm saying. And we find out that Lockhart says that he's just been showing Professor Sprout the right way to Dr. Whomping Willow. And he's always he's always praising himself, basically. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but yeah. Even though he sort of like gives a little bit of fake humility when he's like, I don't want you running away with the idea that I'm better at herbology than she is. He just, and he's like, I just happen to have met several of these exotic plants on my travels. Anyway, and so Sprout's just like, yeah, I'm gonna start my lesson now because fucking tired of listening to your ass. And so anyway, and so it's announced that they're going into Greenhouse 3 today, which creates a spark of interest because they'd only ever worked in Greenhouse 1 before. Why they skipped Greenhouse 2? I don't know. Maybe there's some other interesting things in Greenhouse 2. It probably gets mentioned sometime later and I just don't realize it. Anyway, but it's said here that the Greenhouse 3 has more interesting and dangerous plans. So anyway, they head in there and we get our I'm sorry, I take that back. They're heading in there, and most of the students file in when Lockhart shoots his hand out and stops Harry for a moment. And he's like, "You don't mind if he'll be a few minutes late, Professor Sprout?" And of course, Sprout's like, "Yeah, that's not really cool." But Lockhart's like, "Yeah, good deal. All right, that's the ticket." So then Lockhart begins to not really chastise Harry, but to pretend that he understands why Harry and Ron flew the car to school, because he's convinced that like himself, Harry just wants a piece of the spotlight all the time. Which is great because this will, as you'll see soon, plays into other people's hands like Malfoy, who seem to think the same thing. Anyway, and so yeah, Lockhart's like, "Oh, it's all my fault. I gave you, you made the front page with me. I knew you were dying to do it again, and he's just totally like, I don't know. It's condescending, but it's also just like assuming things that, and he doesn't listen. He's just totally like on and on, like, yeah. Anyway, and we get like Harry tries to protest, but like Lockhart's just like, Harry. There's that specific phrase, Harry 3 times, happens at least twice now on this same page. And he's like, I understand. So anyway, yeah, he's just convinced that Harry is crazy for fame as he is. And so he's like trying to advise him, like you can't go flying cars now just because you want the spotlight. And and he's like, but when I was 12, I was just as much of a nobody as you are now. In fact, I'd say even more of a nobody. And he's like, a few people even have heard of you, haven't they? Yeah, and of course a lot of people have heard of him, but anyway. And so yeah, Lockhart just goes on about himself because that's what he does. And so yeah, and then finally he's done with his little sermon, and he heads off, and Harry. It says Harry stood stunned for a few seconds, and then was like, "Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be in class." He's just like, Harry can't believe Lockhart. We haven't really been introduced to up to this point another character is self-absorbed and self-aggrandizing as Lockhart. So anyway, yeah. So then finally he slides into the to the classroom, and we get our introduction to the Mandrakes, which these are Chekhov's Mandrakes, because they will come into play in the Deathly Hallows a little bit anyway. I mean, it's not like they save the day, but they're there in the Battle of Hogwarts. Anyway. Oh, no, but what am I talking about? They actually are used at the end of this book. I'm ridiculous. That's right. They are indeed Chekhov's Mandrakes, because, well, for whatever reason, I like to spoil only certain things. I don't know. You all probably have read this book anyway, but they're going to be used later in this book for a more important purpose. So yes, and we get right here. We get back to Hermione being the true. It's hard to call Hermione a know-it-all, because know-it-alls are the kind of people who pretends to know everything but don't really. Hermione is just fucking smart, and she reads a lot. So of course we get our descriptions of what Mandrakes are from Hermione, because Sprout has to ask if people know, and of course Hermione's hand is the first one in the air. She is the true, not just teacher's pet, but a true star student, that Hermione. And so we find out that Mandrakes are a powerful restorative, and it is used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state. Boom! Foreshadowing. And then we find out that they are also dangerous. And Hermione tells us why, and that's because the cry of the Mandrake is fatal to anyone who hears it. Which, of course, leaves Harry and most everyone else wondering what in the world the cry of a plant would be. And so, as it is, they have some smaller, what do they say, like adolescent, not even, like they're more than just sprouts, but they are they're young mandrakes, as it were. Anyway, we get a demonstration from Sprout about we get to see what they're going to be doing. They're repotting them because they are growing, and they're going to move them from smaller pots to bigger pots. And so we get a description. They have to put earmuffs on first, so that they don't hear the cry of the mandrake. And Sprout pulls one of the plants out of the thing, and then we realize that their root system has basically like a baby looking creature that inhabits the plant grows out of, I guess, but that it lives under in the root area under the dirt. So yeah, and it's pale green mottled skin, and it's clearly bawling at the top of its lungs. But of course they have their earmuffs on, so they don't have to worry about that. So anyway, she repots it into a bigger pot, buries it into the soil, and then they pull their earmuffs back off, and so we get a little bit more. Oh, they're seedlings, so they are like sprouts. And she's like, yeah, as they're only seedlings, their cries won't kill yet. She's like, but they will knock you out for several hours, and nobody wants to miss any class. So they're going to be using earmuffs. But anyway, so they're going to be repotting mandrakes, and so that's going to happen. We also get mention of the venomous tentacula. Ba, 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 ba. And so we also get to meet one of the Hufflepuffs, who they're having this class with. Justin Finch Fletchley comes over to their table, so that because they're working in pairs, so they need to be four. Anyway, and he, of course he knows who Harry is, and he knows Hermione is because, well, he's like the famous Harry Potter, and Hermione always topping everything. And it's like, and Ron Weasley, wasn't that your flying car? And Ron's like, yeah, that's real cool, Finch Fletchley. Obviously Ron's still stung from the Howler, and who could blame him? Even though he did wrong, that was still a pretty severe moment to deal with. So yeah. And we learned that Justin Finch Fletchley is, like a lot of people, taken with Lockhart. We find out that he believes him to be an awful brave chap. Anyway, and then so... And we find out that he's a Muggle born because he says that his name was down for Eton, which I assume is a Muggle school. Anyway, and then they get on to the business of repotting their mandrakes. They do exactly what you expect them to do. They're reluctant, they're difficult, etc. And then they go. So that happens, and I mean, there's nothing really else to say about that except that they finish, and then they go off and they head to Transfiguration. And they're supposed to be turning beetles into buttons, but Harry didn't really have any luck, and Ron, of course, is having much worse problems because of his broken wand, which that's another. So that's one of the things, and I don't know if this got brought up when Adva and I did the previous episode. I can't remember now because it's been just a little too long ago, but certainly I must have at least touched on it. But I failed to see how Ron could actually make it through an entire school year with a not just a poorly functioning wand, but practically a non-functioning wand. Like, I mean, I know that they don't do a ton of practical things, but I mean, this is an example right here. Like, how did Ron not fail Transfiguration this year when they're clearly supposed to be doing, like, little simple transfigurations, like transfiguring their, what did I just say it was? A beetle into a button. He could never do it. And so, like, how, I mean, I guess maybe, like, he was able to, like, do his essays or his homework or whatever, and get some kind of grade make up for that. Probably copying off of Hermione or something. I don't know. I mean, I love Ron. I do. He's one of my favorite characters. And oftentimes, the one that I relate to the most. But there are times where I feel like, how the hell did he even pass some of the years? Anyway, and this year in particular, because his wand didn't work. Obviously, the next year he has a wand again, and so like he's able to at least do what he needs to do. When he can. Yeah. So we don't actually stay in that class. Sometimes we just get synopsis, and this was definitely a very short synopsis. But anyway, point being is that they had the class. Hermione, of course, we will find out soon, did perfectly because she's Hermione. Harry didn't have much luck, and Ron's situation was abysmal. So they go to lunch. And Harry's like, well, and Ron's like complaining about his wand, and Harry's like, why don't you write home for another one? He's like, yeah, and get another Howler? Yeah, not likely. So yeah, and then we find out that Hermione managed to produce a handful of perfect coat buttons. And Harry's like, yeah, we're not going to linger on this topic, so what do we have to later? And we find out that it is, in fact, Defense Against the Dark Arts, which I just realized in England is spelled with a C. We use an S there. Anyway, and Ron notices that Hermione has all of Lockhart's lessons outlined in little hearts on her timetable. And so we realize, or we are reminded, or just presented with the fact that Hermione is still a human female, and just like any other human, male or female, is prone to lapses in judgment when it comes to being attracted by or smitten with another human being. And so, because it's one of the few times really in the story that Hermione shows this kind of lack of judgment, because any kind of well, to be fair, up to this point, we don't know that much about Lockhart, except that he's a bit flamboyant and showy and arrogant. We'll say that. Which aren't exactly the kind of features that Hermione would necessarily go for, but she's only seen small examples of all these things. I mean, and she understands that he's famous for his books and everything, so, you know. Anyway, but the point is that obviously she's got a schoolgirl crush on their teacher, and did well. I don't know if she knew who he was prior to the point of him becoming, their announced teacher, and then she kind of got it. We don't really understand where it started, because they don't have the internet. So like, how do you find out about people before you like have direct contact or reason to know about them? I know that. I mean, the books must have been out there, but did she know about them already? Had she? I mean, I guess obviously his picture's in every one of them, so there's that with his big cheesy grin and all. Anyway, whatever. And Hermione's like, Ron points all this out about her outlining the lessons in hearts, and she snatched her timetable back and doesn't say anything. So anyway. And they have a break after lunch, and we find out that Hermione is back in her Voyages with Vampires book, which she seems quite fond of and is reading lately. And then we're introduced to Colin Creevey. Oh, little Colin. Harry sees somebody that's staring at him, and then the kid comes over, and he's holding a Muggle camera, and he's another. Wow, I just realized that. Like then two, well, not two scenes back to back, but two scenes pretty close together. We have another Muggle-born, and that's Colin Creevey. So there's definitely like a. Well, of course there is. Duh. Like that's we're. How did I not see that before? We're being introduced to the characters that are going to come into play later in the story for being Muggle-born. I'll be damned. I don't know why I didn't really pay attention to that before, but Anyway, Harry is encountering all these people. First Flinch Fletchley, and now Colin Creevey, who was a first year, and who was a first year that he saw at the through the window when they were walking in, and they saw the sorting happening. Anyway, so we find out that Colin is kind of like a Harry Potter fanboy, because he's read about him, and he's all excited about being, at wizarding school, because he obviously didn't expect it. And he's got a little high voice, and he's speaking breathlessly, and he wants to take a picture of Harry, and then he wants to get him to sign it. And right after he mentions that, hang on, where is it? Yep. And so yeah, he's like, and he's like, could your friend take the picture, and I could stand next to you, and then could you sign it? And then Malfoy is there, because of course he is, and he's like, signed photos? You're giving out signed photos, Potter. And so yeah, at a most embarrassing moment that Harry would have done anything to prevent from happening in the first place, now his nemesis is there, and so Malfoy's like giving him shit about it, and he's like shouting out like, everyone queue up, Potter's handing out signed photos. And of course Harry's pissed, because obviously that's the last thing that Harry would do. And Colin Creevey's like, you're just jealous. And Malfoy goes on to like, just be Malfoy. He's like, I don't want a foul scar right across my head, thanks. And Crabbe and Goyle are there because of course they are, and they're sniggering stupidly because of course they are. And not for the, for the first time, but not for the last time, Ron says, eat slugs, Malfoy. Also foreshadowing. Anyway, and so, Malfoy starts to get into Ron a little bit, makes fun of the Howler, and the if you put a toe out of line bit. And then, of course, in true Malfoy fashion, he not only makes fun of Weasley, of Ron, he then has to dig into the poorness of the family factor, which is, the ultimate low blow. But when we get to know Lucius Malfoy later, we understand why Draco is the way he is. He was raised to be a little stuck-up snot. And so he's like, yeah, Weasley wants a signed photo because it'd be worth more than his family's whole house. Anyway, and so Ron's whipped out his taped up wand, and Hermione stops him, and of course Lockhart shows up, and instead of just diffusing the situation altogether, Lockhart's like, here we go, come on then, Colin. He gets the photo for Colin Creevey with him and Harry in it, and of course Harry's just mortified. But anyway, and so Lockhart gives Harry more advice on fame, as it were. He assumes that Harry was soliciting signed photographs as opposed to what actually happened. And he's like, let me just say that handing out signed photos at this stage of your career isn't sensible. Looks a tad big-headed. As there's, well, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, more lessons in fame from Gilderoy Lockhart, and then they actually are heading in the direction of his class, because after break, that is when they have defense against the dark arts. And so they go to the classroom, and Harry moves to the back of the room and sets up all of his books in a stack so that he doesn't have to look at Lockhart. And Ron and Hermione come and sit on either side of him, and Ron's like, he's like, you better hope Creevy doesn't meet Ginny. They'll be starting a Harry Potter fan club. And Harry's like, yeah, the last thing that he wants Lockhart to hear is the phrase Harry Potter fan club. So he's like, shut up. Shut the fuck up, dude. So we get the our first class with Lockhart, which actually, if I'm not mistaken, might be the only class that we actually have a scene of, because, well, you don't need but the one. And so Lockhart goes on to introduce himself. The first thing he says is, me. And he lists his titles: Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. But I don't talk about that. Of course you don't talk about it, but you just fucking you just mentioned it in front of your class as in your opening speech. Anyway, so and so then he starts the class with a pop quiz, which, as it turns out, the pop quiz has shit to do with Defense Against the Dark Arts. It is a pop quiz on Gilderoy Lockhart himself, which includes questions such as, what is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? What is Gilderoy Lockhart's secret ambition? What, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date? All the way down to number 54, what is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday, and what was his ideal gift be? 54. That's a lot of bullshit-ass questions to have to answer. Anyway. Right, and so... And apparently all of these questions were answered in his books, which is a good indication of the kind of books that they are. And so he's, like, talking about them... Talking about the answers, blah, 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 blah... We find out that Dean and Seamus are like, quite amused by how ridiculous Lockhart is too. Meanwhile, in contrast, Hermione is listening with rapt attention, and then we find out that Lockhart calls her by name because, of course, she's the only one who got all the questions right, full marks, and 10 points for Gryffindor, by the way. Right, and so then we get the first, as it were, lesson in Lockhart's class, which turns out, well, you'll see. So he's, he talks a good game to build it up. He's like, it's my job to arm you against the foulest creatures known to wizard kind. And he's like, asking them to remain calm, and I must ask you not to scream. It might provoke them. So he's pulled out this thing, and there's a cover over it, and he rips the cover off, and there's a cage full of freshly caught Cornish pixies, and Seamus then chooses to bust out into laughter then because he can't contain himself. And he's like, they're not dangerous, are they? And Lockhart's like, don't be so sure. Devilish tricky little blighters they can be. Pixies, really. It's a perfect picture. And so we get a pixie description that they are electric blue and 8 inches tall and pointed faces and shrill voices, blah, 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 blah. And they're acting crazy and shit. And so then Lockhart opens the cage and everything goes crazy. The word pandemonium is used, and that seems about right. So the pixies go rocketing all over the room, and it says that two of them seized Neville by the ears and lifted him into the air. Some of them shoot out the window. And, okay, so time out just for 1 second while I'm in the middle of this description. How do I say? I guess this is the only time that it's really as ridiculous as it is, but Dumbledore, and I guess, there's a thing made about the fact that somehow this job is cursed. How a job position can be cursed, I don't fully understand, but apparently if you're Voldemort, you can do these things. Hiring for this job becomes increasingly more difficult as the years go on after Voldemort has refused the position. Or as I should say, as Tom Riddle was refused the position. But one has to wonder a bit about the idea of Lockhart, of all people, being given this position, because, I mean, really, Dumbledore clearly could see through him and know that he's a fucking con. But I guess maybe he thought that he didn't need to be all the things he said he was in the books in order to be a decent teacher of the subject, because obviously if he can embellish all those stories or make them up or whatever, that he at least understands how the thing, how defense works, even if he's not actually all he claims to be. So maybe there's that. But you're struck with the ineptitude of this guy, and you're like, man, Dumbledore, really? This is who you chose to entrust this class to. Anyway, so yeah, so yes, pandemonium. The pixies are just doing all kinds of shit. They're spraying the class with ink from ink bottles. They're shredding books. They're tearing pictures from the walls. They're upending waste bins. They're throwing shit all over the place, out the windows. And Neville ends up swinging from a candelabra because he got, floated up near the ceiling. And so Lockhart's like, come on now, round them up. And of course, Lockhart gave, zero instructions, ahead of time. Obviously a real lesson would have involved, being like, all right, I'm going to release these, and when I do, you do this charm or this, whatever, to immobilize them or do something. And then we get an even further demonstration of ineptitude when Lockhart pulls out his wand and says some kind of bullshit spell, pesky pixie pestinomi, and nothing happens. Not a damned thing. And not only does nothing happen, but one of the pixies ends up flying by and grabs Lockhart's wand and throws it out the window. At which point Lockhart realizes he's completely lost control. And then Neville falls from the candelabra, although the candelabra gives way. And the bell rings. Which, by the way, another thing, how the hell was there enough time for the lesson to already be over? The description of everything that's happened up to this point couldn't have taken more than 15 minutes, and their class has to be at least 45 minutes, right? I don't know. I always feel like that Rowling kind of plays with time a little bit, and sometimes things take longer than they ought to, and a lot of times they take less time than they ought to. But I feel that it's not just her. Other authors do that sometimes too, and it kind of bugs me. But anyway. So the bell rings, and Lockhart straightens up because he had dove under his desk after he lost his wand, because ultimately he's a coward. Spoiler alert. Anyway, and he sees Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who are almost at the door because for whatever reason they're last heading out. And he's like, right, I'll just ask you three to just nip the rest of them back into the cage. And then he just bolts out of the classroom and closes the door. And Ron's like, can you believe him? And Hermione's like, he just wants to give us some hands-on experience. Hermione's totally still in defense mode of Lockhart. She's not really willing to accept that he is what he actually is, which is a fraud. So anyway, meanwhile, Hermione's like, immobilizing them with freezing charms because she knows things that, she knows things that most people in her year don't know, because she reads a lot and practices, I guess, somehow. When does she practice during the summer, though? You can't do magic away from school. Anyway, she learns the theory at the very least, and I guess maybe she practices in her dorm room or something when she gets back to school. Anyway, and even Harry's like, hands-on. Like, Hermione, he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And Hermione's like, rubbish! You've read his book. Look at all those things he's done. And Ron, quite sagely, I might add, says he's done. Because, I mean, it's fairly obvious to anybody, but Ron's just gone ahead and put it out there. And so, yeah. And so that's actually, that's how our chapter ends. So our first real look at Lockhart is for the reader anyway, to expose him for what he is. But Hermione, not quite ready to own up to it yet. And, you can't blame her. She's got a crush. Everybody gets crushes. And I'm sure the books are captivating reading. And so even though she's intellectual, she's still young. And so she's a voracious reader, shall we say. She's she's not only that, but she's, because she's young, she's innocent, and she hasn't, it hasn't occurred to her yet that somebody would write a book like this and it be full of lies or embellishments or telling a story that was actually somebody else's story and presenting it as your own. This hasn't occurred to her yet. She has a naivety about her due to her age and, her background probably. Her parents are dentists. It wasn't a bad life growing up, but it was probably maybe a little bit sheltered and just kind of simple. Whereas Ron has seen some of the, especially having a father working in the ministry in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, Ron has a bit more practical knowledge of the shall we say, skullduggery that wizards will get up to. So, anyway, yeah. So actually, this chapter, for all intents and purposes, is really about Harry and Hermione. I'm sorry, about Ron and Hermione. It's not really that much. Harry's just there to be the centerpiece between them, and the as I say, where the camera is located over his shoulder, but it's really focused back and forth between Ron and Hermione, mostly Ron even. So yeah. And I think that is about it. We did it, folks. We did it. It's 11 p.m. Eastern time right now, which means that by the time I get this uploaded, it may already be the 18th, my time even. But all the same, this is my gift to you. I as I always say, I endeavor to do more and to do more frequently. But I don't even know. I'm making no promises right now. I'm just saying happy anniversary to you, Schwifty Squad. I love you guys. I love you guys. You guys are so cool. And yeah, we will catch you in the next one. Peace.